Right, well, we come on to our next speaker. Ken Smith is going to be talking to us about Green Sandpipers at Lemsford Springs. I'm sure many of you know Ken, and he could be talking to us about any number of subjects, I'm sure, not least tree sparrows and lesser spotted woodpeckers. Just a bit about Ken. Ken moved to West Sussex in 2016. But before that, he lived in Hertfordshire for over 40 years, initially in the Watford area, but mainly in Welwyn Garden City. During his Hertfordshire years, he was a member of various Herts Bird Club and Natural History Society committees. He completed a 10-year stint as the BTO regional rep, organised many county bird surveys, and was a joint author of 3 successive Hertfordshire County bird atlases. The first 1968-72, and then 1988-92, and 2007 to 11, so very significant contribution to Hertfordshire birds. Took up bird ringing in the 1970s and has ringed birds as part of his own studies, and since 1981 in his professional career as a research scientist with the RSPB. He retired in 2008, but is still very much engaged in local ornithology, although less active as a ringer nowadays, apart from keeping his local great spotted woodpeckers colour ringed. He was chair of the BTO Ringing Committee for 6 years, and since moving to the West Sussex Hampshire border has been a member of the scientific committees of both Sussex and Hampshire ornithological societies. In 2015, with his wife Linda, he set up the Woodpecker Network to champion studies of the highly threatened lesser spotted woodpecker. The Green Sandpiper studies were started in 1984 with friends and fellow ringers Barry Trevis and Mike Reed. Thanks largely to their dedication over the years, this is now one of the longest running colour ringing projects in Europe. So Ken, we really look forward to hearing you speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tim suggested I give a talk at the conference. It's great to tell this story, I think, and it's also great to see lots of old friends again, because it's been a while since we've been in Hertfordshire. So the Green Sandpiper story started quite a long time ago. First, a bit about the Green Sandpipers. So some of you will realise that Green Sandpipers are a very widespread, numerous breeding bird in the world. They nest in western and eastern Palearctic in the boreal forests. Their nests are up trees, which is quite unusual for a wader, and the chicks leap out of the nest onto the ground and then looked after by the parents until they fledge. And as you can guess, it gets a bit cold up there in the winter, so they all go south to various places, and the grey areas on this map are the sort of wintering areas they go to. A lot go to sub-Saharan Africa. In Asia they go down into India and places. But because they're on the west of the continent, a few spend the winter with us. So in the UK it's an extremely rare breeding species. I think there's only about 1 pair now in the Highlands. Those red circles there at the top, but much more common in winter. This was the winter distribution on the right there from the BTO Winter Atlas, the last BTO combined atlas. And there was some evidence in that atlas that there had been an increase since the previous one, an increase in distribution. So the suggestion is that more and more of these birds are wintering in UK. So this is what was known about the migration of the bird. This is the map from the BTO Migration Atlas, all the ringing recoveries up to 1997, and you can see that they come from Scandinavia, where the birds were presumed to breed, through UK and down into France, Iberia, and just about into Morocco. So this sort of southwesterly migration route passing through Britain. So the study I'm going to talk about started at Lemsford Springs. So some of you will know Lemsford Springs, Nature Reserve Hartsman Insects Trust, fantastic place. Shallow watercress beds, but really importantly, that gate there is quite significant. So it's a site where you have to have a key to visit, so it's not open to the public. which means that it's actually undisturbed. If it was a nature reserve that was open to dog walkers and everybody else, then there'd be nothing there. So shallow-fed lagoons. So this all started in 1983.
Excellent.
When three of us realised that there are a lot of green sandpipers at Lemsford Springs. Barry had just taken over as Water Reserve, and we thought we'd have a go at trying to bring them. And we realised that we ought to colouring them to actually collect good evidence. So these are not quite sepia prints. When I first wrote this talk, I thought this would be three young blokes set out on a study. But then I thought about it and did my arithmetic. We were already middle-aged by the time we started. So we're in our late 30s before we got going. Right, so that's the start. We've done that one. Done that one. Done that one. Back to Lemsford Springs. Right, here's the key thing. The gate, the private nature reserve, the shallow lagoons kept open for breeding waders and lots of other, not breeding waders, waders and lots of other birds. Here we go, right. Where we were. So, since 83, we've ringed over 200. You'll notice a slight change in wording from your previous version, because I wasn't sure how many we'd actually ring since then. But over 200 green sands at Lemsford, and because Rhymedes were able to catch some green sandpipers, they actually had some colouring combinations to use as well. So they ringed about 70 plus there. So Hertfordshire is the place for ringing green sandpipers. And since we've done that, well over 20,000 re-sightings of individual birds over the years. So it's fantastic, really, because the hides overlook the place. How have the birds been trapped? Well, initially it was with mist nets. I don't know how we hit on it, but putting up mist nets at first light, you can catch the birds as they arrive on the lagoons. Say a bit more about that later. Sadly from my point of view, the arrival of ring-necked parakeets in mid-Hertfordshire means that mist netting lagoons is pretty much out of the question. Barry has the scars to show from a net full of ring-necked parakeets being extracted wearing Kevlar gloves, and 200 quid mist net totally ruined. So it's not really on mist net over the lagoons anymore. And so we've developed these spring traps. So these are the sort of spring traps that most bird catchers use, but modified to use them over water, so we can adjust the heights and adjust above the water, and triggered remotely. And that's really good for catching birds, and particularly catching birds that you want particularly to catch. So it's not a random catching thing. You can say, I want to catch this one, put a ring on it or whatever. And that's in the autumn with, 5 green sandpipers sat on the trap. Very soon in the study, we found that the return rates of our birds from one year to the next was incredibly high. I apologise, this is an old slide. It was done after about 6 or 7 years of the study. And those in the mid-80s, some of you remember we used to have cold winters. And so the return rates from one winter to the next of the green sands depended on how many days of frost had been in the previous winter. But the main point is it's 95, 80%. So like a lot of waders, they have a very high survival rate. And not only survival, but they're actually returning back to Lemsford year after year after year. So that came out very quickly. What we set out to do as well is to see where our ringed green sandpipers were in the landscape around Wembley. So we were checking gravel pits and the Bimram and every other river we could. And this is a result of 8 or 9 years of searching. So this was me mainly crawling around trying to get close to green sandpipers before they saw me to read the colourings on their legs. So the red dots here are the ringing places. And so it's Lemsford Springs, but the other red dot is some of you might be old enough to remember the mythical coal green tip. I'll tell you a bit more about it later, but it was a very special place for a few years, and it turns out to have actually been really important in the number of birds at Lemsford Springs. So it's just next to Welwyn Garden City, an old landfill site that had lots of waders on. But the circles there are all the places where we saw our colouring birds, so all down the Limram, every little gravel pit, a few farm ponds, but none really outside this area. And in all the time we've been doing it, we've never had a Rhymedes colouring bird come to us. So they use a landscape, but it's on quite a local scale. So at this stage, all we got was colouring birds to work out what was going on. But then I plotted the date of first seeing a colouring bird in the autumn and last seeing in the spring. That's what these graphs are, showing that colouring birds were coming in early June back to Hertfordshire from wherever they'd been, and they were leaving probably at the end of April. So we got all that from crawling around in vegetation looking at colouring birds with no technology. And we found that there was a big shift in habitats. So in the summer and autumn, they were on still water sites, so gravel pits, ponds, anywhere with a muddy fringe where a small wader could feed. But as you moved into winter, it was flowing water, presumably because in winter, particularly in the early years, still water sites freeze over. And that still happens, but obviously the winters aren't as cold now, so they stay on the still water sites for longer. Now the picture there in the top left is actually the famous coal green tip. And what happened there was that for a few years in the 80s, it was an uncontrolled tip. It was run by, I think it was Redlands they were called at the time. These gravel companies keep changing their names, but it was Redlands then. And they had a leachate problem, so the water was running out of the bottom of the tip, and we think going into the Lee. We could never find out what the actual chemicals were, and I think with freedom of information we could probably find out now. It was all a bit secretive. So what the gravel company had to do was to dig a trench all the way around the landfill, and then collect the water that came into that trench. And what they did was pump it back onto the top of the site. And so that's what that is there. And you can see all those pools. The building at the top there is the hospital in Manningham City. And if you look carefully, you can actually see water spraying up. And this went on for a few years until they then got permission to tip more refuse on the site and cap it properly. So now if you go to Coal Green Tip, it's a boring piece of grassland on a big hummock. And the reason it's a big hummock is they added a lot more metres of landfill, I think, to finance capping the thing. And what it was like was just an amazing wetland, and it was like Coronamin soup, because there's a lot of nutrients in this water that's going around. And it was amazing. So we, loads and loads of different waded species there, red shank, green shank, rough. We actually, overnight once caught corncrake, and corncrakes do pass through. It was just amazing, but within about 3 or 4 years, the place was closed. So that's the coal green story. Technology was pretty crude when we started, but we didn't know where our birds, the Lemsford birds, were roosting. So we radio tagged a few with standard old-fashioned bleep, bleep, bleep radio tags, and found immediately they were going to Cooper's Green Tip overnight, every night, and that was it. And so that's why we could catch them with a mist net first thing in the morning, because they're actually coming back from their roost. And we had activity monitors on them and showed that when they were roosting on the gravel pit, they just sat around all night, so they weren't feeding, but they were feeding during the day. And it was very cold, for really very cold periods. They would actually stay and roost at Lemsford, and then they were far more active, so we think they may have been feeding a bit at night, but largely most of the feeding was during the day. So we had a few sightings and recoveries of our colouring birds over the years. So this is again the BTO migration atlas map, and the blue dots are the symbols of where our birds have been. So there's one in Norway where colouring bird was reported on the breeding grounds, which is brilliant. Belgium, another ringer caught it. France found dead, surprise, surprise. And in Spain, that's a remarkable one. So that bird in Spain in August 2021 was actually at Lemsford Springs the afternoon before and turned up in a park in Santander the next day. That's really quite something. Right, so why is Lemsford so good for green sands? Well, it has shallow water, and spring fed, so it's open during the cold weather. And as I said earlier, the gate there, I think, being a relatively private site, only visited by people who behave responsibly and don't disturb it, is really important. It wouldn't take many dog walkers per day to ruin the whole place. And the other thing is this, freshwater shrimps. And what we've done over the years, Barry in particular, has worked out how to manage the lagoons to encourage freshwater shrimps on which these birds feed. And that's one of Tom's photos in the middle. And what you can see here, just there, is a pellet. So green sandpipers feed like mad, bring up a pellet, feed like mad, bring up a pellet. Those pellets are pink, and they're just like fish paste, really. I suppose we call it fish pate nowadays, but it's the same stuff, it's pink. And that's what they feed on, lots of shrimps. And the management at Lemsford we've gradually evolved it to actually provide lots of shrimps. And so the watercress that grows on the lagoons gets raked up in the autumn. Here's the work party, Neil Holmes Smith, prominent there, and very famous people as well. So the Attenboroughs actually raked the cress at Lemsford when he came to plant an oak tree a long time ago. So what that does, it opens up the water in late summer, but the shrimps are detritivores. They actually feed on decaying vegetation. And so the shrimps feed on the raked up watercress bed. It gets raked up in heaps like this, and under those heaps, if you went to look in late summer, it would be just swarming with shrimps. And every night they probably come out, the shrimps feeding in the surrounding area, and then gradually as the heaps drop down, the shrimps spread out. And of course they get fed on by lots and lots of birds. So there's plenty of management tasks, and as some of you know, on occasions major engineering work, so Lemsford has actually had big refurbishment. It was closed for a while. I haven't seen it myself, Barry says it is a bit of a mess still, but it will get better with this volunteer work parties to sort it out, and we hope it will be back to normal. Okay, so if Lemsford's so good, why are these birds going all over the place like this in the low tide? And what it's down to is territoriality. This is something I wish we'd done lots more work on, but this is something we really haven't done that much on. But so there's the picture of the birds on the trap. So when the birds first turn up in late summer, they're all happy as a group. In fact, seem to prefer to be as a group. But then there comes a point in most autumns when they start disputing with each other, and suddenly they will chase each other off the lagoons. And this is just an example of what happens here. So the solid line there is the number of birds on the lagoon. Date goes across the bottom from October, November, December. So in October that year, there were about 8 birds around on the lagoon, all living happily ever after. And then suddenly, at the end of October, they start disputing with each other. And you get all sorts of ruckus, and poof, 1 or 2 birds will take over the lagoons, and the others will have to go somewhere else. And then that's what happens. And I think at the moment Barry's saying there's just a couple of birds that are holding court on the lagoons, and any other green sand that tries to come in gets chased off. And it's only when it's really cold that the birds that are not on lagoons will force their way in, and then you get a lot of disputing. You have small territories, and off it goes. And I think what that's all about is that the shrimps are gradually getting depleted over the winter because everything's feeding on them. They're feeding on the decaying cress, but all the birds, the water owls, everything else are feeding on shrimps. So the numbers of shrimps are going down and down and down through the winter, and these birds are defending that resource to get them through the winter. Okay, so that's a lot of story about Lemsford. So then let's go back to where the birds go in winter. So a lot of this study has actually been sort of following technology as it develops. So when we started, all there were standard pinging radio tags. But gradually, as we've worked for longer and longer, the technology has moved on. So the fantastic tags you can now get. And so back in 2013, we started to use various what are called archival tags. These are tags that store information about where the bird has been in various ways, and then you recapture the bird, download the data, and it tells you exactly where it's been. And the first ones that were available were things called light level tags. So these are tags that measure light every 5 minutes, light intensity, and from that you can infer the local time of midday and night and day length. And from that, using some astronomical equations, you can calculate approximately where the bird is in the world, except at the equinox, where day length is equal all over the place and we can't calculate anything. But you see it kind of goes wrong during the equinox. The errors on this go up and up and up. And of course that's a bit of a problem because most birds actually migrate around the equinox. So the light level tags are only accurate to maybe 100 kilometres. So for, say, small birds going to Africa or something, it's fantastic, but for us it was a bit dodgy. But then these GPS tags came along, so they've actually got an inbuilt GPS receiver, and they're incredibly accurate. So 10 metres or so, you can tell where the bird's been, so it's fantastic. And they've improved even during our study, 9-year study there. The first GPS tags we had would only do 9 fixes, and we ended up with tags that would do about 150 or 200, all for 1 gram. So that is just quite remarkable, really. So here's a green sand with a GPS tag on. You have to be really careful because obviously these birds are in front of eyes being observed. We couldn't have anything that looked terrible or interfered with the bird at all. So really careful what we did. Here's that's the area just coming out the back, slight lump on its back. Lots of people didn't even notice that the birds in front of the hide were tagged at the time. But what we did do, and I think this is probably incumbent on people using tags like this, is we did a whole load of behavioural studies to show that the behaviour of the birds wasn't affected by the tags. And so these 2 graphs show it really well. One is the percent of time that the birds were feeding, and the red birds are tagged birds and the black symbols are untagged. There's absolutely no difference between there. And the other one is the fraction of time birds were preening, and there's a slight increase in preening at the end of the winter, but not much and not very significant. So we were quite satisfied that our tags weren't affecting the behaviour of the birds. And of course the tags are removed. So a lot of our birds are tagged. In fact, all our birds we tagged were subsequently seen alive and well. And in fact, one of them we tagged in 2 winters about 5 years apart. So that all looks good. Right, so what do we get from all our tagged birds? So this is where they breed. So Lemsford with the blue dot, the red dots in Norway and Sweden. The green one there was a bird going twice. That was tagged in 2 winters going back to the same breeding area. And the big circle there is the only bird that we actually got data from for the light level tag happened to be one that went to Finland. So that's a bit annoying really. It would be great to have one of the others that went to Finland, but we didn't get it. So that's where we were. I think it was 19 birds. We got about 10 tracks back. The thing really is remarkable is how quickly it all happens. So these are the dates of a couple of birds where we had tags on that we can do multiple fixes over a few days. And so the red bird there was in Hertfordshire on April 26. 2 days later it was in southern Norway. Another 2 days it was halfway up Norway. And then 2 days after that it was on its breeding area where it stayed before it came back. And equally the other one there left a bit earlier, a couple of days across to Denmark. Within a few days it's on its breeding area. So what they're doing is a single overnight hop. We had some tags that were taking fixes every 12 hours, and we've got fixes halfway across the North Sea from those. So one evening in April, late April, they decide to go and they're off. And the next morning they're in southern Scandinavia, and they take 2 or 3 days and they're on their breeding patch. And in coming back, it's pretty fast, but a bit more leisurely. So they stayed on the breeding area till mid-June, and one of them there was back in 10 days, and the other took, 12 days to do the trip, coming through various places in Denmark and the Netherlands. That one coming through Denmark and the Netherlands, it was amazing. You looked on Google Maps, and the Netherlands site was just in farmland. You could see all the tram lines on the agricultural field. There was a pond in the corner of the field, and that's where the fix was. So whether that's a regular stopover site for that bird or not, or whether it just found a pond and dropped in, who knows. So then, going back to that picture I showed you earlier, the blue bars there, this is what we derived from watching colouring birds when they were last seen and see back. You can then put that into context with these birds that are actually tagged. So, the median date of leaving Hertfordshire is April 20th. The earliest goes early April, and the latest right at the end of April. It takes them a couple of days really to get to their breeding area. By this time we were able to sex the birds, so you can actually send feather samples off to people that actually use sexing for aviculturists, so for people who've got parrots and stuff, and for like 10 quid each you can get the birds sexed, so we were able to determine the sex of our birds. And the males stay in the breeding areas for 60 days, 2 months, the females only 42 days, and that fits with the ecology in that the females abandon their young as soon as they left the nest, and the males stay and look after them for a few days. That fits perfectly with that. It take 11 days to get back to Hertfordshire. So the females are back by mid-June and the males are back by early July. And I guess if they actually fail to breed, they could be back even sooner than that. So these birds are leaving at the end of April and back by the end of June, largely. So they're only away for a few weeks each year. So this, I think, is one of the most important slides in the talk. So these are the numbers of birds in January at Lemsford from 1971 through to 2025. And so we started our ringing project in 1983 with those really high numbers at Lemsford. And that's kind of what triggered us to get started. And that's, as I said, was when this coal green tip was going. And it seems that lots of birds were actually being attracted to coal green tip in the autumn and then staying through into the winter and then turning up at Lemsford in midwinter. And we did wonder when we started, why there hadn't been this many birds at Lemsford before. Were green sands, but not the numbers that we were getting. But we just shrugged and got on with it. But then, in retrospect, I think we can now see what was going on, because we went through a period of 1999 to 2007 where there weren't any birds at Lemsford in midwinter. They went right down to nothing. We thought, what's going on? And then it picked up again, and we're now back to the normal 3, 4, 5 midwinter birds at Lemsford again. And what this is all about, we now think, is the availability of wetlands in midsummer when these birds first appear in Hertfordshire. And that's when they make their life decisions as to what they're going to do. So a lot of the birds in midsummer are young birds. In their first year, they decide where they're going to winter. And once they've done that, they stick with that strategy forever. And so the high numbers at Lemsford while coal green was going, big numbers of birds. It took maybe about 10 years for the number of birds to drop off, even though coal green had been closed for a while, because they'd already decided on their wintering strategy. Went through a patch when there wasn't much in the way of active gravel workings around, and then Cooper's Green and Stamborough gravel pits got going, and that's now the key place. So I think the message from this is there's wetlands in the landscape that determine how many green sands you can breastfeeds. And it's not just Lemsford, you've got the whole package together. How am I doing? So key points: birds leave there, move quickly to breeding areas. I'll show you a thing in a minute. There's limited evidence from one bird that they're actually, as well as being faithful to their wintering site, they're absolutely faithful to their breeding site. I'll show you that in a minute. Stay away for a couple of months, and then most of the year they're away from the breeding areas. So I'm just going to finish by showing a whole series of locations for this one bird. So white on green is no longer with us, I'm afraid. It had a good old innings. We think it's the most observed green sandpiper in the world ever. It was reported on nearly 1,600 different days in different places, so Lemsford and other local sites. When we first tagged it, there it is on the South Lagoon at Lemsford. That gives you an idea of the accuracy of the GPS tag. So there's little green dots, other locations. I'm not sure what the red ones are. The green dot in the top there is Barry's Garden, where we had the tag before we put it on the bird. So there it is, that's it. These green sandpipers molt into breeding plumage while they're still here. So they're gorgeous looking things in April because they're all speckled. So that compares white on green in breeding plumage with happens in midwinter. So there's a lot of molting going on. That's body feathers, not flight feathers. So it heads off at the end of April. And on the left there, it's on the southern tip of Norway. And we thought, oh, that's unusual. Green sandpipers don't usually go on the coast. What's going on? So anyway, if you expand the Google Maps, it was actually in a pool a few hundred metres inland from the coast. So it probably was a bit tired after its crossing of the North Sea and dropped down the first place it could. So that was it. Spring Passage. There it is on the breeding ground, and so the circle there is, we think, was the nest site. That cluster of green dots was the tree, and you can see individual trees on that. So we had planned to head off to Scandinavia to find our birds, but then COVID intervened, and I think age has now intervened as well, so I'm not sure we'll do it. That picture there is a sort of habitat. That isn't the actual habitat, I confess, but that's the sort of place. Open forest bogs is where they nest. Then you've got the odd location around the edge of the shore. Then the bird comes back. And this bird came back to what was the early stages of Stanborough Pit. And it probably wasn't seen at Lemsford for quite a few weeks. It was in Hertfordshire for all that time. And as soon as Lemsford opens up, you start to get it there. So that's remarkable. And this is, I don't know what those green lines are, ignore those. But the two circles, this was a single bird, blue on white, that we tagged and got the breeding location in 2015. And we got it again in 2019, and it was nesting about 100 metres away from where it was the last time. So this is amazing. These birds have a wintering area that might be a few kilometres across, but a breeding area that's similar, and that's their life. That's it. I think we hold the national longevity record for the green sandpiper. So this white on green was ringed in August 2012, and it was already a fully adult bird, so it was more than 1 year old when we ringed it. So the interval between ringing and last observation was 11 years, 7 months, so that's the sort of figure you'll see on the BTO website, but its age is probably 12 years and 10 months. And it's quite interesting. We've had lots of birds that get to this sort of age and we're thinking, oh, we're going to push on the record. And they disappear. So whether there's a senility coming in at that sort of age, we don't know. We don't have enough data. What do we conclude? They're amazing little birds. Just great things to study. And I think the other big message is the importance of wetlands in the landscape. And we've seen that with all those birds of the year and birds being filmed at Stanborough Pit. So in Hertfordshire, the wetlands are largely coming through gravel workings, but you need a wet landscape. I think that is it, folks. Acknowledgements to everybody who's helped, particularly the people who funded the talk, and happy to answer questions. Okay.